Hi, good morning. And welcome to the Practice-Based Learning webinar series, facilitated by me, Kalima Ibrahim, RCOT Council Member for England and Chair of the England Board, and also a lecturer in occupational therapy at the University of East London. So please say hello in the chat, let us know who's joining us today, where you're from, and what role you have in practice-based learning or placements. So we've developed a set of guiding principles called the practice-based learning principles of practice-based learning to support the development and quality of sustainable placement opportunities for pre-registration learners. And what was launched on the 20th of October 2022, a collaboration with the CSP. Okay, so we're RCOT, so we champion occupational therapy. We're here to help achieve life-changing breakthroughs for our members, for the people they support, and for society as a whole. We promote the value of occupation and improving people's health and well-being, and we promote the value of occupational therapy as a means of improving people's health and well-being. So our profession is growing. Having a little problem with my slides. So our profession is growing. So we have over 45 education providers delivering over 100 programs across the UK, over 7,000 learners and over 1,700 new graduates. An increasingly diverse cohorts experiencing a range of practice-based learning opportunities across the 4 pillars of practice. So we definitely need to think about our placement opportunities to meet the needs of our learners, our services and the people that we serve. So these are the principles of practice-based learning. So there should be a link in the chat and you can just have a read of those. You can download them from the RCOT website. So this webinar is called Broadening Practice-Based Learning Opportunities. So today we have 3 presentations. So we have presentation 1, delivering a non-traditional placement with housing partners, and a second presentation, a leap into the unknown, delivery of a personalised care improvement project, and the third presentation, broadening practice-based learning opportunities. Everyone needs PAL. And then after the 3 presentations, there will be a Q&A session. So throughout the presentation, when the presenters are presenting, if you just put your questions in the chat, in the Q&A box, and then we'll get to your questions at the end. Okay, so the webinar is relevant to the principles of practice-based learning 2, 4 and 5. So you can have a look at those on the RCOT website and you can download the document, and also the learning and development standards and the career development framework also. So please put your questions, share your thoughts in the chat and on social media, hashtag RCOT, PBL, and these are our Twitter handles as well on the screen. So our first presenter, delivering a non-traditional placement with housing partners. So it's Helen Brown and Fran Mills from the University of Derby, and Jenny Watson and Jenny Hadson from Derby Homes. So over to you, Helen.
Good morning, everyone. Really lovely to be here, and thank you, Kalima, for inviting us to talk at the webinar today. Looking forward to speaking with you about our experiences, which has been a really interesting journey for all of us. I do need to say first that unfortunately Fran wasn't able to join us this morning, so I'm afraid I'll be delivering her slides instead of her, which is a shame. So, but I wish Fran well, and you know, it's been a pleasure working with her on this project, as with my colleagues from Derby Homes, Jenny Watson and Jane Hadson. So if we could move on to the first slide, please. So this is a brief introduction of some of the topics we were going to cover today. We wanted to talk about the reasoning behind trying to expand into non-traditional placements, and how this particular project at the University of Derby was a collaboration with our housing partners. We wanted to look at consider the placement from the different perspectives of those involved. So that's from Derby Homes, the provider, Frans' views as a student, and myself as the person who set up the project, but also I actually did the long arm supervision on behalf of Fran as well. So that was quite a dual role there for myself. We were going to take a look at the expectations of all of us involved. And reflect on how that felt for everybody, how the pragmatics worked, what our expectations were. So and then think about summary by thinking about what learning everybody gained from the placement for everybody. So if we could move on, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so At the University of Derby, we set up a non-traditional placement project, which myself and a colleague Kay was involved in. This was sort of really driven by the nationally recognised need to increase placement capacity. We were having increasing difficulties sourcing practice placements due to a lot of pressure on practice resources, and this was compounded further by COVID-19. So on the back of the Health Education England, the clinical placement expansion program, we were able to gain a bit of money that we could start to run this project. And the project originally was talking mostly about nurses, but then included AHPs and occupational therapists, of course. The aim of the project was to increase connection and placements into the private, voluntary and independent sectors, to try and develop some role emerging and in non-traditional settings, and take a look at new supervisory structures also. And for me, it was quite important to increase the diversity of placements to reflect the interests of our learners. So there were a number of really good reasons why it was important to try and look a bit broader than our more traditional placement sources. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the process of setting up the placement was not too onerous, really. I had some contacts from my previous life working as in practice in housing, and initially it was just an email to a senior manager at Derby Homes to say, to introduce myself, say we're looking at setting up some placements. Is it something that we could chat about? So we then cascaded this to appropriate staff, which was fab, and had a really quite an early meeting with a couple of people from Derby Homes, of which Jenny was a member of that meeting, just to consider whether there was any potential for placement, whether it would be able to be beneficial to Derby Homes, if they would be able to offer the capacity to take a student, would it be appropriate setting for the student, and how would supervision work in that circumstance. So after a bit of thought and a couple of meetings and some reflection, we decided that yes, we thought we could all work together and it would benefit everybody. So we had a meeting with the occupational therapist on site, who was Jane Hadson, who hopefully has been able to join us today as well. And we agreed that the long arm supervision model would be the most suitable due to Jane's being the only member of staff in this team who was an occupational therapist and has an extremely high workload. So we offered long arm supervision to support Jane and also support Fran during her placement. We then had quite a bit of paperwork to fill in, various risk assessments, and how we were going to sort of set up the placement and do a bit of a placement audit and what was needed in that regard. So, but that hopefully wasn't too onerous, but perhaps Jenny might tell you differently when she it's her turn to speak. But yeah, hopefully we got that sorted reasonably quickly. So this led to a meeting then with an allocated student who was Fran, and the placement began in June 2022. So if we could move on. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Jenny now, who's going to talk about the Derby Homes perspective.
Thanks, Helen. So my name's Jenny Watson. I'm the Social Housing Options Manager at Derby Homes. So at Derby Homes, we're an arm's length management organisation. We've got about 12,500 social housing properties in the city, and we manage them on behalf of Derby City Council. So we're responsible, as it says, for managing the social housing register. So anybody who wants to register for social housing in the city, and then we're responsible for allocating the properties that belong to Derby City Council or Derby Homes directly as well. So we were really keen to be involved in this when the opportunity kind of arose, because as I say, we've got the responsibility to ensure that people are housed appropriately. And we've already been hugely successful, I think, and Jane will be embarrassed, but having Jane work with us directly as an OT, and the benefit that has brought to, you know, disabled. Jane specifically works with children, but you know, the offer that we've got to families who are needing adapted properties in the city. If we can move on, please. I think we've gone backwards a little bit. Could we have the next one as well, please? Thank you. So our expectations, we really didn't know what to expect, because we'd never had a student before, but as I say, we were really keen to be involved, and we knew that it would be hard work, particularly for Jane. As Helen's already said, Jane's a bit of a one-man band in our organisation, but we have got a team around her that supports. So we were keen to be able to raise the profile of housing really in your guys' world. The process was really easy. Helen made it easy, which was great. There was obviously that little bit of paperwork. It's certainly nothing that would put us off as a provider of a placement. It was really quick and easy to agree who was going to do what, the scope of what we were able to offer, and we managed to get it off the ground fairly quickly, I think, although say Jane and Helen might have some other perspectives, but I don't think so. We could move on, please. So say the practicalities of getting it set up. So the paperwork was easy. The support that the university were able to offer us was really very good. Initially, from our point of view, because of the way that Jane is set up within our organisation, she works for social care, but she works specifically for us. So Jane's got access to both sets of IT systems, and it was initially a bit of a challenge to get Fran set up with access to everything that she actually needed to. And because it was our first time, there were perhaps some elements that we hadn't fully considered before Fran had started, and it did cause us a bit of a delay, if I'm honest. From our point of view, because Jane is just Jane in the role, it was time consuming for Jane, and the impact, and that's not a reflection on Fran or the work that she did at all. Handing cases over, but then getting them back at the end of the placement took a little bit of time for us to work through, but that might be different, you know, depending on how each organisation is set up. Move on, please. Thank you. Oh, I think we might have gone a little bit too far. I think that was it. Thank you. There you go. Thank you. So the reflections for Derby Homes is that it's certainly something that we were really pleased that it went very well. The whole team kind of embraced the placement, which hopefully meant that Fran felt really supported in what is, as you guys will know, a very complex kind of area. So Jane works specifically with children. It raised the profile of OT services within housing, which even, from our perspective is something that we don't always consider. But Fran managed to pass, with flying colours, and we were really pleased to be able to have a part in that. The bits that say didn't quite go so well, I've already said it's about the IT provision held us back a little bit, but going forward, we would obviously have been able to learn from that. From the student perspective and from ours. And in fact, Fran, as part of her placement, put us together a bit of a guide about, what a student might want to know when they first came to us. So we've got some lasting kind of learning and guidance from that too, which has been great. Move forward, please. So for future students, from our perspective as a placement, given the nature of the role that Jane's got, we felt it would be really important to have the right student. Jane works with, children that have got life-limiting and very kind of complex issues, and it can be very emotive. And we perhaps hadn't realised, and Jane being a practitioner of many years, perhaps hadn't realised how many coping mechanisms she's put in place herself to allow her to do the job and give her the resilience that she's got day to day. And I think it's important that a student that we took into, our organisation in the future understood what it is that they were going to be dealing with, and having somebody who is resilient and quite a capable student, I think would have been and Fran was, is important, I think, from our perspective. I think, Helen, it then goes into Fran's slides after that.
That's right, yep. So as I mentioned earlier, we were hoping that Fran would be here today to present her own work, but unfortunately she couldn't make it. So I'm going to do my very best to tell you a little bit about what she was trying to say to you. As you can see, Fran was a third-year student here at the University of Derby, and previously she'd been involved in more the acute medical wards and community mental health placement. She was a little bit anxious and nervous about being allocated a non-traditional placement, which is like she wasn't quite sure what to expect, and she said it was it'll be with the Derby Homes. Oh great, it's going to be grab rails and a few ramps. That'll be fine. I know about that. It's fine. I don't think she quite expected the complexity of the placement. But he really understood that it would be environment-based and things like adaptations and suitability of properties was what she would be involved in. What she was not expecting that it's going to be a paediatric placement. And actually, with hindsight, that's perhaps something that I was a little bit remiss on. I didn't realise that that would be quite so impactful for Fran, that she wasn't expecting a paediatric placement. So I felt like she hadn't really been able to prepare. It was something she'd not really taken an interest in, and therefore she felt it was it was an awful lot to learn going in. So in terms of the pragmatics, she was keen on shadowing Jane in her Jane's specialist role. She realised quite quickly just about how complex that housing is, and particularly the added element of working with children and families. So she's put in her reflection, she's put there is so, and so is in capitals, much to it. So not only the housing element, but also things like the systems and the processes that come with it, and the children's aspect, which added an extra level of complexity altogether. She wasn't quite expecting the timescales involved in housing either. They can be quite lengthy. The rehousing process or rebuild process can be quite a lengthy one. So of course, Fran was just seeing like snapshots of bits of practice rather than seeing through a whole, if you imagine a whole OT process journey. So that was something that she needed to demonstrate her learning with different pieces off different cases, which was quite difficult. Oh, sorry, I think we've moved on. If we could just skip back just a sec, that'd be great. So thank you. But she was involved in several reviews of previous assessments. She was involved in equipment provision and providing interim managed to manage safety and risk assessment stuff in the meantime. She worked also closely with the wider team, as Jenny mentioned, and that was a property surveyor and the complex needs officer. And I think she enjoyed working both with those members of staff, plus that she had opportunities to work with other members of the broader housing team as well, which was great. So if we could move on. Oh, just one. That's it. Perfect. So thank you. So her reflections that she did find and wasn't quite expecting some of the cases to be very emotive. As Jenny's already mentioned, unfortunately, some of the young people that they work with at Derby Homes have life-limiting health conditions. So therefore, Fran found some of those quite difficult, and she had a couple of moments where she needed quite a lot of pastoral support around that. She realised she had a huge amount to learn, and it is a complex area, but I think that wasn't necessarily a negative thing. I think she enjoyed the learning that she was involved with, but it was lovely that she did feel really supported throughout, and she's actually put in a reflection that luckily Jane and I got on really well. She was very supportive and has lots of experience. She could tap into her knowledge and wisdom, and she offered me plenty of time to debrief and discuss things and ask questions. So you can't ask for a better support than that, really, can you, in a placement? But she felt there were some pros and cons to having an on-site supervisor and a separate long-arm educator. So that was quite important for myself and Jane to have a close working relationship also. So in terms of her learning, she realised you do need to have resilience and have the courage to share your concerns and set up your own coping mechanisms. She thought the client group was really interesting. She felt that she learned an awful lot about a new appreciation about the physical environment and housing. And she will be looking at, she said, in the reflection at buildings and fabrication and footprint and layout in a very different light, looking with that new element of appreciation for the physical and social environment. She thought Derby Homes was a great placement provider and employer. And she did really did enjoy working there. She felt like she learned an awful lot, and she thought it would be a great opportunity for anyone with an interest in housing. And she thinks it's a really good and positive place for occupational therapy, where you can sort of demonstrate the key principles and have a really positive impact with the people that you're working with. So there were lots of good learning there in terms of the like practice element. But also she did come out of it thinking, advice to future students, you need to be yourself and trust yourself and your own judgment. And she thought that was about having been authentic about that process was really important. So I'd like to thank Fran for preparing those notes. So move on. Okay, just one of that'd be great. Okay. Oh. Could we go back? That's it, one more, and I think we're there. Thank you, that's great. We're getting to time, so I'll be brief about this bit. So this part is about myself as an educator being involved in the project. So I previously practiced in housing, and I was Apple accredited at that time back in 2011. And I'd already supervised occupational students undertaking MSc and BSc pre-registration courses. So, and also in my current role, I've worked with the placement team doing mid-placement reviews and stuff like that. So I do have a bit of experience as an educator in the practice setting. And I was really excited about working facilitating a placement in housing. That's great. That's my area of practice and interest and expertise. So yeah, I was really keen to do it. I did a little bit concerned about not being on site and seeing the day-to-day stuff in the placement, but I thought, you know, I'm sure it'll be fine. And I was a bit concerned about whether I'm going to be available enough for the learner and being available enough to support the staff in the setting as well. Can we move on one? Thank you. So in terms of reflections, it was really nice to be close to practice. I think as an academic, we do sometimes feel a little bit removed from practice. That was great to get that connection there. And also I realised how appropriate it was and important it was to support the learner academically, but also pastorally, particularly when times were difficult and slightly emotional. And some of the cases were quite complex, and that resilience was really important. I think the communication between all partners was really, really key, and that open and honest contact, it was really essential to provide a good placement experience for everybody. So for me, the learning points were trust being a key element between all parties, open, honest communication, being authentic and making yourself available when you can. Try to plan things in advance. We put all the supervisions in, but sometimes things happened and changed, so be flexible within that, and try and ensure you empower your learner to lead their own learning, if that makes sense. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so just pulling it all together, this is a bit of a summary of the overall view of what we all sort of thought. So managing prayer expectations of all parties is really important, and going forward, that's something that I will ensure happens in terms of, in this instance, not understanding it was a pediatric placement, but I will make sure that that's really, really clear going forward. And to accept all partners have like a few apprehensions and concerns with it being a new venture, including the student and myself and Derby Homes. So that is quite interesting, really, that we all had slightly different concerns, but we're nonetheless excited about trying the project. So I guess the key there is to try and reduce those where possible through supporting one another and working closely together. I agree with Jenny that the process of setting up and running the placement was a real strength. I personally thought it went really well. So I thought it was good to take a team approach to the placement, and that was the best way of getting impact for everybody. We do also agree that the systems and IT did have a bit of an impact on the placement experience, but we feel like we've learned from that going forward. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just to pull together, so the reflections, yeah, clear, honest communication. Make sure he's providing support pragmatically, but also pastorally and academically. We think all parties gained learning from being involved in the placements experience, but we shouldn't underestimate the setting being complex, and acknowledge and recognise that it can be emotional. So learning go forward is about trying to have strong, trusting relationships, and they are absolutely essential for success, and to develop resilience and support the learner to do that as well, and to plan but be flexible. And what we did definitely feel that it illustrated the benefits of occupational therapy in the housing setting. Okay, next slide. Okay, so summary and next, this is so we're delighted that our learner passed the placement, completed the course, and is now employed as an occupational therapist. So well done to Fran. We have a new relationship between ourselves as the local university and our major local housing provider, which I'm really proud of. I'm really delighted, and I hope we can have future collaborations and perhaps further placements, but also maybe be able to work together in other ways as well. So that's something that we'll perhaps discuss at some point. But overall, I think it's been a really successful and productive placement experience for all concerned. And I'd like to thank Derby Homes and Fran for being such a great team to work with. And I think that's us, but I think we're taking questions at the end, aren't we? So I think it's now the next group are jumping in. So I will mute myself and stop my video. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Hi, thanks very much, Helen. So our second, throughout the presentation, if you'd just like to put your questions and comments in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end. So we're going to have another presentation. So it's called A Leap into the Unknown, the Delivery of a Personalised Care Improvement Project by Amanda Sangster from NHS England Personalised Care Delivery. She's NHS England Personalised Care Delivery Partner, and Paige Yearwood, an occupational therapist, employed as a healthcare navigator and armed forces community, and Tori Rennie, who works for a children's refugee charity abroad. So throughout the presentation, please put your questions and answers and your questions and comments in the Q&A box. So just go ahead, Amanda.
Brilliant, thanks very much, and it's great to be here. And I'd just like to say, so I'm Amanda Sangster, and as Kamal had said, I work for NHS England in the Strategy and Transformation team, and I work as a delivery partner for personalised care. So I've got two fantastic students with me today, and it'd be great if they could just say hi and introduce themselves just now. So Paige, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Paige. I'm currently employed as an occupational therapist at Tees and Ness Valley Trust, and I've just got new employment in the armed forces as a healthcare navigator.
Brilliant, thanks Paige. And Tori, do you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Tori Rennie, and unfortunately I don't yet work for child refugee charity. That's a slight mistake on the front slide, but I am moving abroad, and that is my intention when I get there.
Brilliant, thanks. So I'll just move us on. Hopefully these slides will change. Yes, brilliant. So as we said, we decided to call the presentation A Leap into the Unknown, because I was very new in post when I had the request through to take a student. So our team hadn't taken a student. The brief that we gave the students was very loose, and they absolutely had to take a leap into the unknown with choosing the placement. And the clinical team that we partnered with, so the post-COVID assessment team, they were a new team as well. So it's quite a new thing for them. And this placement took place in the middle of COVID. So it was a virtual placement. So that was very new for us as well. So it was all very new, and it was a leap onto the unknown, but it was absolutely a positive experience for us all. So I'll just move the slides along. This is just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to do a quick background to the placement, how it came about, and an introduction to personalised care. We'll do an overview of the placement, and then the Tori and Paige will talk about the impact on their uni experience and on working life as well. And then we'll have time for some final reflections. So just thinking about how the placement came about. So I'm an occupational therapist by background and had worked in paediatrics for the majority of my career. So I'd taken students a lot and had good working relationships with our local lecturers in the universities. And when I moved over to NHS England, I was still getting requests for students. And I was thinking, oh, I wonder if we could make, a student placement work, doing the work that I was doing in personalised care. And at the same time, as I said, it was in the middle of COVID. So I was doing some clinical work with the post-COVID assessment service. And I could really see the opportunities that they had there. They were quite a young team, a new service, and there was a real opportunity for them to get some extra capacity in and have some students and really start to embed personalised care. So that's why we put that word in there, serendipity. I wasn't looking to take students at that time, but I'm so glad that I did, because it was a really positive experience for everybody involved. So I thought with this next slide, it would be helpful just to give you a bit of an understanding of personalised care. So personalised care is all about giving people choice and control about their health care. Personalised care is one of the 5 drivers for change in the long-term plan. It is absolutely a golden thread that runs through all policy and guidance within the NHS now. And this graphic that you see here was one that was developed by people with lived experience. So people that used healthcare services were asked about what would personalised care mean to them and what would be important for them. And this is the graphic that was devised following their input. So I'm not going to take you through all of this. I'll just pick out a couple for you. So that red one at the top, kind of like at 12 o'clock, that's talking about rather than asking people, what's the matter with you? Asking about what their symptoms are and trying to fix them. It's very much changing that narrative and changing it to something, what matters to you, what's important to you, and really understanding the holistic picture and that real person, rather than just somebody who's just got symptoms that you want to try and fix. Now, very similarly, the blue picture kind of over on the left-hand side, rather than just being seen as a patient with symptoms, really thinking about somebody as a whole person and understanding their strengths and their skills and their attributes. And then the picture just down at the bottom, I think, is so important as well. Rather than the health professional having all the knowledge and expertise, really trying to shift that so that the people that we're working with really share the knowledge and they start to take a lot more responsibility for how their healthcare is managed. So I think you can take time when the slides come through, when you're looking at this, just to look through some of the other graphics there. But we're just going to have a look as well, just really briefly, at the personalised care operating model. So the personalised care is a whole population, all age model, so it's appropriate to everybody. And if you have a look here at the shared decision making and choice, that first box on the left, this model shows all the different tools and strategies that build together to make up personalised care. And I'm sure a lot of it is going to be really familiar to you, but I'm hoping that by just going through, you can start to really pick up where there might be something that you just want to think about in a bit more depth, or really understand a little bit more so you can start to embed it into your practice. And I think shared decision making is a really good example of that, because I'm sure we all feel that in our practice we do shared decision making, but research has suggested that only 50% of patients are as engaged and as active in decisions about their healthcare as they want to be. So it's really something that we could focus on. And when I'm thinking about shared decision making, I'm sure you're all familiar with the work of Michael West. And I love that phrase that he's got about listening with fascination. And I love that. And I think that's something we can really take when we're working with our patients. And Alf Collins, who's one of our clinical directors in personalised care, said that you should approach each interaction with humility and curiosity. And I think that's just lovely. So when I'm working, I kind of have Michael West on one shoulder saying, listen with fascination, and then Alf on the other saying, approach with humility and curiosity. And I really try and keep those two voices in my head when I'm working. And I think those really help when you're trying to do shared decision making, which is really that equal partnership, understanding there's that equal partnership when you're making decisions about healthcare. So we just move across, there's personalised care and support planning, is really those facilitated conversations about what matters to somebody and what's important to somebody, and really capturing that and putting that down clearly in a support plan or a discharge plan or a care plan, whatever the different teams might call it. But it's really understanding about those what matters to you conversations. Then we just pick out 3 more from the next row down. So social prescribing, I'm sure you've all heard about social prescribing, but really thinking about those wider determinants of health and really thinking about how issues such as employment, debt, housing impact on somebody's health and well-being, and really starting to focus on that and help somebody to work through those. And social prescribers also help to plug people into community assets and community activities. And we're really trying to encourage people, so when they give their prescription of medicine or whatever it might be, also to think about giving a social prescription. How can you encourage somebody to really go in and plug into their community and understand what support might be there? And then supported self-management, really giving people the knowledge, skills and confidence to manage their own healthcare. So not being a paternalistic healthcare system where all that knowledge is held with the health professional, but really funneling that knowledge and that skills and that expertise out to the patient so they can better manage their own healthcare. And then personal health budgets, all about thinking about that budget and that money that would normally be spent on an individual's health, and having that conversation with them. If you had that money and that money was available to you, how would you use it to manage your own health condition, and having a lot more control about how the money is spent there. So you can see that there's a whole host of different tools and strategies that can really be embedded into any clinical pathway or clinical team. And it was these different tools and strategies that we shared with Paige and Tori when they came to the placement, and asked them which of these kind of had real resonance with you, and the same conversation with the post-COVID assessment team as well. Which out of these do you really want to hone into and start to think about? So I'll just pass over to Paige so she can start to talk through what the placement was and give an overview of the placement.
Yeah, so this placement was a 7-week diverse placement, which we chose from offers from University of Brighton. It was a virtual diverse leadership.
Oh, Paige, I think we've lost you for a minute. I wonder if she's... Tori, do you... Oh.
I think it just threw me out, sorry.
Oh, there you are, you're back, fantastic.
So yeah, it was a virtual diverse leadership placement with NHS Improvement and the post-COVID assessment service. In total, Tori and I had 4 educators. So we had 2 educators from NHS England, one being Amanda, and 2 educators from the post-COVID assessment service who were practicing OTs. Tori?
Yeah, and this placement was a co-designed project. So it meant that Paige and I, when we began our placement, were given lots of ideas for personalised care projects that had been brainstormed with the PCAS team prior to our arrival. Deciding our own project felt a little unnerving, but we were really well supported by our educators who were brilliant at answering our very many questions. I think this next slide then, please, Amanda. Okay, so this is just a little overview of what Paige and I did during our placement. So initially it felt really different from previous ones because we didn't have individual clients to work with. But once we understood that the entire PCAS team, the post-COVID assessment service, was our client, then we were able to move forward. And it really was quite a light bulb moment for us both. And then we were able to combine the new knowledge about how to implement a quality improvement project, which is an NHS methodology, with our existing OT process training to create an intervention that supported the personalised care approach that we had learnt from Amanda. And given enhancing social prescribing support was highlighted as what mattered most to the PCAS team, we delivered an educational intervention to enhance the links between social prescribers, the PCAS team, and their clients. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so the work that we completed, I think at first it was quite hard for us to get our head around the fact that instead of a client or a service user, we had the client as the PCAS service. So it was quite challenging at first to get our heads around that. But I think once we sort of understood that and we put in an OT model to deliver our intervention to the PCAS service. So we spoke to around 40 plus people, which were PCAS clients, Health Education England training lead for additional roles, third sector organisations such as Age UK, Together Co, South Down, Going Local, Sussex social prescribing leads, and leads from NHS England and Improvement, and social prescribers themselves. So we managed to get a lot of information from them people about what mattered to them. We created a quality improvement project plan using NHS England Service Improvement, communications plan to manage extensive number of different stakeholders, a spreadsheet of all social prescribers within the scope of the PCAS team, and including inclusion and exclusion criteria, as well as the referral process for the 32 primary care networks and their associated GP surgeries. We did a project management data guide to sustain the social prescribing spreadsheet long term, and a non-standardised outcome measure, which is administered at the baseline and then at the end of the project. Next slide, please, Amanda.
And as part of this placement, a fundamental part of it was about learning about personalised care, as Amanda said at the beginning. And initially, Paige and I think it's fair to say, we struggled with how this was different from our OT experience and training. And so we decided that we would map where we felt it was consistent. So, for example, we study occupational science theories about meaningful occupations as agents of health, and we're also taught to use person-centred models. And we felt these were both consistent with the what matters to you core concept in personalised care. We're also schooled in developing effective therapeutic relationships built on unconditional positive regard, shared decision-making and strength-based approaches. And again, all of these seem to support the shared decision-making and patient choice aspects of the personalised care model. However, we also appreciated that we need to challenge our assumptions, and the next slide shows where we felt we could improve our approach as OTs. Next slide, yeah.
So in our shared decision making, we can improve on our collaborative goal planning skills by just remembering to always be present, empathetic, and listen with fascination, as Amanda said. It also means asking the clients what options they've already explored before giving our thoughts. This not only recognises that the client is the expert of their condition, but can also help build the problem-solving abilities of the client. On to the next one. So as a student, I felt something I needed to work on was not always needing to solve the problem and be the expert. Instead, I've started to ask to clients what they've already tried, what worked, why it didn't, and what didn't work. Giving them that ability to be sort of a sense of autonomy in their own recovery. It's also important to use assessments that are based on identifying what's important for the client to do in their daily life, what positive skills and assets they have that they can use rather than what symptoms they're experiencing. And then finally, linking with social prescribing and using patient activation measures can support client self-management. And then obviously, so something me and Tori actually weren't aware of prior to this placement was the My Health and Care Record NHS app. So it was something new to us. We'd not heard of it. So we actually downloaded it, and on there, it sort of uploads blood test results. It gives you appointments, and you can book appointments through the app. So I think it was encouraging service users to use that to sort of take that sense of responsibility in their own recovery as well. Next slide, please, Amanda. Finally, Michael West. Sorry, Amanda. Michael West talks about compassionate leadership as a core skill required for delivery of personalised care. His discussion about the importance of modelling self-compassion really resonated with us. I think I struggle with this concept as I put a lot of pressure on myself and I strive to do quite well. So going forward, I'll kind of curb this by considering self-compassion to be a way of helping others to model healthy behaviours. It's also important to reduce chronic excessive workload, which Michael West described as the most important factor affecting staff well-being and the ability or not to be able to be compassionate to others. Next slide, thank you.
So in terms of the impact that this placement had on Paige and I, from a uni perspective, it was really profound for me and for the rest of my time there. So for example, I was able to spread the word about personalised care model and social prescribing to our cohort once we were back at uni. I'm ashamed and maybe a bit embarrassed that we weren't aware of these concepts particularly before. We'd heard them, but they weren't a kind of core part of our understanding. And hopefully this helped challenge others in our uni to consider more deeply what it means to support clients to have real choice and control over the service that they want to receive. It also positively influenced my final competent placement. By grappling with the difference between social prescribing and occupational therapy, I felt more comfortable with my OT identity and where we can provide value. And in speaking with a very large number of different people with different backgrounds and roles, I developed a more confident communication style that I knew that I could adapt to different situations. The placement also enhanced my thinking about appropriate and effective OT interventions and highlighted that the client doesn't have to be a single person. It could be a team or even an entire service. And finally, understanding NHS strategy about the additional roles and reimbursement scheme, the R scheme, as a result of this placement, opened my eyes to the value of OT role within GP surgeries. And this is a setting I'd not previously considered working in, but would now love to explore when I return from living abroad. Next slide, please.
So looking at the impact on working life, so myself and Tori finished our course June this year, was it? Yeah. So we finished June this year. So I was working in forensics and then went straight onto a role in Tees Nest Valley in an acute mental health setting. And some of the things that sort of impacted me is the importance of when thinking about personalised care and that practitioners and students understand the difference of what personalised care is, but what person-centred care is. Throughout our degree, we learned a lot about person-centred care, holistic care, but actually personalised care is different from that. And it's about what matters to the person as previously discussed, which has really reflected the personalised care model. So as I said in my previous role, I was employed as an OT in forensic service. Upon completion of this placement, it really made me realise the importance of having our service users be able to input into their own recovery and what they feel matters to them. I think it's really easy for us as professionals to suggest an assessment based on what we feel they could do to improve their well-being. A lot of assessments I've carried out are cooking assessments, and majority of the time the service user will just agree with you. But actually, when you change that and ask open-ended questions and language, which will sort of change the input into their recovery, and everything can be adapted to OT. So we know we change things to make karaoke part of an OT assessment. So things can really change when you realise what actually matters to that person. So as I said before, I've recently just taken up some new employment, and it's a project that is run by NHS England to help armed forces families, which will help providing advice, guidance and support to people and carers of the armed forces community who are serving. And it's also about accessing NHS services, GP practices, and signposting social prescribing. So I kind of feel I've already got a bit of a head start with that because of this placement. During my interview, they really asked me about personalised care and social prescribing. So being able to have done this placement gave me the knowledge for that. Otherwise, I don't think I probably would have got this opportunity. Having the knowledge learned on this placement has really helped me push the personalised care model into my workplaces and challenge the thinking of other professionals. I think it was quite easy before for consultants, psychiatrists to sort of offer their opinion on what's wrong with the person instead of actually asking them what they feel they could improve on or what they think could help. Another massive part was my confidence. So prior to this placement, I wasn't a very confident person, but because of this, my confidence and leadership skills grew enormously. I think without this placement, and I think Tori mentioned, we did have quite a little direction of which way we kind of should or shouldn't be going. So it kind of gave us the chance to grow into like practitioners, and for that, really, I'm just eternally grateful I had this opportunity. Next slide, please, Amanda.
Yeah, so I'm just aware of time, so we'll see these really quickly. We'll start kind of at 11 o'clock and go around in a clockwise direction. So just some of the final reflections that this place have really provided much needed capacity to the PCAS service, that new and evolving service. And I know they were really appreciative of the mountains of work that Paige and Tori did on the placement. It was just brilliant. So moving round to the next one.
Yeah, placement can be a variety of things. So I think, as the previous presentation discussed, it doesn't have to be sort of a traditional OT setting. We really benefited from this not being a traditional setting and from being something a bit more diverse.
Yeah. And we really tried to model and share the values of personalised care, and you can see how well Paige and Tori have done on this presentation, really being advocates and champions for personalised care. And it's great to see that. Well done.
And I think having 4 educators benefited both us as students and also the educators. In this busy environment, the educators were able to share the responsibility for supporting us, and we benefited from experiencing different knowledge, skills and communication styles of the educators.
Yeah, we spoke to a vast number and a variety of people, which developed our confidence and understanding of how OT can fit into the health landscape and into primary care services especially.
And finally, this placement gave us not only greater confidence in the identity and value of the OT profession, but also project management, team building, and NHS quality improvement skills. And these have been invaluable as our careers develop. So I'm really pleased we took the leap of faith to try something different.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So just we have one final slide, if it'll move on, with some resources. Oh, there we go. So, yeah, so there is a resources slide. You can just go and have a look if you want to find out anything more about personalised care. Lots of places to go and have a look. But thank you for Paige and Tori for coming back and doing the presentation. Did a fabulous job. And thank you for inviting us to come and present today.
Great, thank you very much for that, really interesting. So put any questions and comments in the Q&A box, and then at the end, after the next presenter, we'll go through all the questions. So we've got a third presentation. Broadening practice-based learning opportunities. Everyone needs a pal, by Anita Volkert from Glasgow Caledonian University.
Thanks so much, and it's just such a pleasure to be here, and I hope everybody's enjoying these panelist presentations as much as I am. So just moving on. Okay, so yeah, I'm delighted to be presenting today. Professor Bannigan's not able to be with us, unfortunately, but she and I have been really working over the last couple of years on peer-assisted learning, and hence our little catchphrase, everyone needs a pal. So everyone needs peer-assisted learning in their placement life. Okay, and sorry, that's just jumping around a little bit. And just in terms of our principles of practice-based learning, which have been beautifully presented by the RCOT and CSP recently for us, and the career development framework pillars relevant to the work that I'm presenting today on peer-assisted learning. Really, principles 1 and 4 are our key ones. Our practice-based learning opportunities are co-produced, and that we use flexible, appropriate and supportive models of supervision and delivery. And I think really moving into some of those wider models is both the challenge but also the opportunity that presents itself to us as we come out of the COVID years, but as we move forward into a new workforce for health and social care. And really, I think for the career development framework pillars, we're relevant right across the 4, from 3 to 9, because practice-based learning is really everybody's business, right from where to go. Okay, so just moving on. So, sorry, I'm just jumping around here. So what is peer-assisted learning? So it's very well evidence-based. I think that's probably a great place to begin. And a method of peer-to-peer learning in which students actually support each other. And I think one of the things that tends to happen when we talk about more than one student on a placement is that practice educators get a little bit nervous, understandably so, thinking, oh my goodness, that will be 2 students or 3 students or 4 students. That'll be a lot of extra work. But actually, the work is partly done by students working together. And we know that peer learning is one of the most powerful ways that we can actually learn. So when we work with other people who are in the same experience as us and reflect with them on their learning, reflect on our learning and cross that over and support each other, we get some really fundamental learning. Peer learning also works with students who are just slightly above or slightly below each other in terms of their year levels, and also across different programs, pathways, cohorts is what we tried as well. So in practice-based learning, the way that we work with peer-assisted learning is that 2 or more students are placed together with 1 or more educators, and students learn together on their placement. Students could be at the same level or different levels, and when they're at different levels, that's often called near peer-assisted learning in the literature. And we call it that when we use it at Glasgow Caledonian as well. And the placement's designed so that students learn with and from each other. So it's not just throw 2 students in together, it's actually designed that way. And we are working up some workbooks and some handbooks to help support that process of students learning with each other and that design of the placement from in advance. So practice-based learning activities that are peer-assisted could include, but aren't limited to, they could actually include anything, are working with service users in your traditional style on a traditional placement, and we are working with that at the moment. I have some experience of doing that in Sydney as well in my days working there. It could really just be around the briefing, debriefing, reflection process. So students could actually be doing quite different things on placement, but be coming together for that briefing, debriefing, critical reflection, but they could be working entirely together on project and research work. And that's the example we'll look through today. Okay, so the benefits of peer-assisted learning, really well evidenced, huge amounts of evidence right across the allied health professions and the literature on this actually. Increasing confidence and boosting resilience in students certainly made my ears prick up when or my eyes prick up when I read that. As we all know, boosting resilience in our workforce is really one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment right across the board in the allied health professions. It helps students and then going on in their workforce life be able to find solutions to problems and use each other to do that, and provides emotional support. So some really nice benefits there. Strong evidence base actually helps the process of learning as well. It helps students become more receptive to learning and learning effectively from one another, collaborating with others. So again, those skills that we really need for the workforce of the future. Also helps with organisation and planning, which is a real tricky thing on placement for a lot of students, and often an issue that can sometimes really trip students up. So it really helps them take control of that organisation and planning, evaluate their own learning, and give and receive feedback, a super important skill for their workforce life. helps foster that culture of community, develops those softer skills that we're really looking for in our workforce, and hence the workforce of the future of health and social care. So the challenges of peer-assisted learning, where we have benefits, but there are also challenges, and challenges can occur when students have really different learning styles. I think the sort of learning styles idea that a lot of us are familiar with, you know, that sort of activist or experiential and so forth. I mean, there is quite a lot of doubt in the literature about that, but it's probably fair to say that many of us have preferred ways that we like to learn. And if those ways are very different, it can be difficult. It's not insurmountable, but it just needs some work and some negotiation. It can be difficult when students have very different knowledge levels. So maybe a final year student with a very early first year student probably isn't the best match. Again, it's not insurmountable, but often it works better when the peer is quite near, so just above or just below. When there's competition or intimidation or difficulties in that relationship, and really that's where your educator time might come in. So educator time might be required to deal with those issues. You also need, as an educator, to think ahead and design and plan the placement a little bit in terms of how you're going to have those peers working together. And you need that time for assessment. So one of the things I often say to educators is, if you're thinking about a peer placement of any kind, you might find your supervision through the placement is less demanding than you think, and might actually be less demanding even than with one student, but you need that additional time to go through the assessment process at midway and at the end. So plan that into your diary right from the start. And we might find that there's some culture change that's required, as peer-assisted learning hasn't really been the norm in occupational therapy. It has in many other professions. Speech and language is a great example. Physio to some degree, medicine and nursing are well established, but it's not really been the norm in our profession. So a little bit of culture change in terms of something. And so why do we need it? Well, we have, we have a population that need more allied health professionals. We have an aging population. People are living longer with higher morbidity levels, and people who are being diagnosed with long-term conditions at younger ages are living longer, often to full life expectancy, and that's fantastic. But what we're finding is we actually need, and brilliant examples from the previous presentation actually, we really need allied health professions, occupational therapists included, to be working to enhance quality of life. So our focus in health and social care is kind of shifting away from curative to quality of life actually, and that's where the allied health professions can step in. So we need more allied health professions, we need more people in training, and hence we need more placements. We also have some retention issues as well, which I think are well documented in the literature. Digital technology is changing as well, so the way we work needs to be a little bit different, and we really need our allied health professions in a situation where they're doing complex, individualised, personalised assessment, communicating at really high levels with service users and others. That direct intervention maybe is actually something we won't be doing as much of in the future, arguably. So it's interesting to see how that's shifting. So our preparation needs to be a little bit different as we move forward with our future workforce. Okay, so some examples from Glasgow Caledonian. We have a rolling placement project that runs with Professor Bannigan, and she and I have worked quite closely together on that. So she does a transition to retirement research project, and she takes 8 students to herself as one educator each time that placement rolls through. So 8 students to one educator. We also did the 4 and 8 student approach within an international project placement running through the COVID years. And that was with the Think Pacific organisation. So our students were working with third sector organisations in the government of Fiji to deliver those projects. And I'll talk that example through in a bit more depth because that was one of the ones I supervised. In our third sector, we use the 2-to-1 model extremely widely, both 2-to-1 occupational therapists and 2-to-1 interprofessional allied health professions. So we might have an OT and a physio, or an OT and a medical student, for example. PARMIS is a Scottish third sector organisation, one of our great 2-to-1 pioneers, I guess you could say, but we use this model with nearly all of our third sector organisations, Bifida, Scotland, etc. All take more than one student at a time. And we have been piloting this approach with our statutory providers, with NHS Lanarkshire and Ayrshire and Arran have been trialling it with us over the summer, and they were using the 2-to-1 near peer model where they had a student in just slightly above another student, and they worked them together to provide mentorship and support to each other, as well as through their practice educator with great success, actually. So that's been brilliant. Okay, so just a general overview. We initiated some of these new models really at the height of the pandemic, although Glasgow Caledonian has a long history of role emerging placements, actually, so we were able to build on that foundation. And we subdivided our students into smaller teams and or pairs. So when we had 8 students, we placed students into groups of 4 or pairs within that. So they weren't necessarily working all the time as a conglomerate of 8, although some of the time was that. In research and project placements where students might be working virtually from home, or there's less of a focus on an office space, there might be an office space, but it's not somewhere people go every day. We tended to have a morning check-in, so first thing in the morning check-in, sometimes an afternoon check-out. So students had structure to their day and also somewhere to think about that organisation and planning. In our third sector and NHS placements, the educator usually followed the usual placement pattern for however they ran their day. But we always, in peer-assisted learning, encourage students to solve problems themselves, use each other and use the other resources available to them. Group supervision is offered weekly, so either if you're in a pair or in a group, educators give that supervision in pairs or groups, and really the last thing we would want educators to be doing would be to supervise 8 students individually. That wouldn't work, and that's not the focus of the model, which is about learning from each other. So generally only the formal assessment process where an educator is assessing competencies would be completed one-to-one. Okay, so I just want to kind of take you through the Think Pacific placement, which was the one we ran with the Fijian third sector and governments. That was a virtual placement, completely online. Students worked that from home or from the university library, wherever they were most comfortable to work. That was a virtual mobility placement. So it was an international placement, but completed from UK soil, as students didn't have to travel there and weren't able to due to the pandemic. So that placement was based within the organisation, and I can really relate to our previous presentation talking about getting your head around a different concept of what a service user or what a client is when you do different kinds of placements, because in these situations, the client was the third sector organisation or the Fijian government who had asked for a project to be delivered. And it took students a little while to get their head around that actually, although the project was going to benefit the population of Fiji, their client was actually the third sector or the Fijian government. And these were virtual internships. They addressed international development issues as part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals for the people of Fiji, with an occupational therapy flavour. So students could choose from a list of required projects, and they did so, and they needed to weave their occupational therapy knowledge and understanding into that project. And they were largely public health projects. Students had a mentor from Think Pacific, but they were supervised by an occupational therapist throughout. So we gave a lot of expectations to students to really help ground them to understand. So that they were required to learn, to engage with the learning materials provided by Think Pacific, who did a huge amount of cultural kind of education really prior to the start of that placement, because of course, if we come to a Fijian placement with our UK eyes and start to think of solutions that are relevant to us with our UK eyes, we may not be thinking about the most appropriate ways forward that would work in Fijian culture. So students obviously needed to understand a Fijian culture and the needs of the population of Fiji. And they had to be self-directed in learning and time management, which I think is a great learning experience for students, and to reach out for support and guidance when needed. So the ability to know when you needed support and guidance, that's a really powerful workforce skill for students to think, I have my time, I have the work that I need to do, I need to plan my time in order to get that work done, and what do I need help with and who do I need to ask? And students were required to produce individual project outputs. So they had to present a project at the end of their time for their third sector organisation or for the government organisation. They also presented their presentations to the group, and they had to show, and they worked together on groups on this, they had to make really clear links to how their public health project linked to occupational therapy theories and practice, and particularly occupational justice, occupational science. They also had to do some dissemination. That was part of our requirements for the placement. And we got them to do that through social media and through a range of options. We gave them a bit of a structure, and we used the discover, decide, design, deliver model of project planning. So discovery is all about discovering the cultural context of that placement, discovering the needs of the population, and actually discovering what was on offer. Then making a decision about what the project would be, designing that, and students had about 2 weeks to do that normally, and then delivering their project. And that structure worked quite well. And we gave them some slightly more contextualized guidelines around how they link that broader project design to occupational therapy theory, practice, and process. A little bit of an example of the timetable structure there. Okay, and the support and supervision was that daily catch-up time. Students could request one-to-one whenever needed. Their weekly supervision was 4 to 2 educators, 2-to-1 sessions, sometimes a whole group of 8 as well. And they had group work to do as part of their placement. So the placement happened to some degree individually, with a group working together to support each other on their individualised project, and then the larger group of 8 in which they received some support, some check-in time, and did some presentation back to them. Okay, and the feedback we got, peer learning was really well received on all of these placements. Think Pacific, the research placements, the third sector placements we have running that use peer learning, and our NHS placements that use peer learning. The students really rated the team working extremely strongly, and they particularly liked the cross-cohort, programs. We did some where we mixed up the MSc students with the BSc students, for example, which very rarely happens on our program, and certainly I think in a lot of universities. Our students really, really appreciated that mix of levels and program experience. So that whole team working perspective really, really worked for students. For educators, it certainly increased confidence in supervising kind of new model, practice-based learning. So we used a range of models actually within this. It wasn't just peer-assisted learning, it was project-based, it was long-arm, it was virtual. But actually our educators got a really good opportunity to try a range of different models all in one. And just having that increase of confidence so that it didn't become this new thing that people had never done before really helped us implement the models more widely. Educators really found it rewarding. They said it was fantastic to see the students develop through peer-assisted learning, that they weren't having to facilitate so heavily, and to see that happen naturally through that peer-assisted learning process. And everybody liked the importance of work readiness skills that these brought to the fore, managing online platforms, managing one's own time, producing deliverables, being responsible for your own learning and performance. So some really powerful feedback. So I guess key messages. I think the really important one for me is that peer-assisted learning isn't just asking educators to take on twice or 4 times or 8 times as much work. It can actually reduce workload. I have to say my evidence for that is mostly anecdotal through working with it. There's a little bit of evidence in the literature that supports that. I think that's where we need to explore it a little bit further actually. But every time I speak to an educator who's never taken more than 1 student at a time before, and after they do it, they often say to me, I'm never going back, because that was amazing, because they actually just learn from each other and work together, and I can pair them up and send them off to do things, and there's not such a demand on me. And I think that until you try it, you don't realise how powerful that is. And it has, you know, those benefits of enhance student experience and learning, and does really help us create that workforce for the future. Yeah, so peer-assisted learning may be a model. Again, I think we need probably more evidence on this as we move into our future health and social care years. But I think it's a model that prepares students much more effectively for future health and social care work. And it's really around those softer skills, I think, for me, around communication, around the way you learn, around the ability to teamwork and network and gain support, build resilience, and feel more strongly nested, I guess, in your own skill set as a student occupational therapist, and then hence as a workforce occupational therapist. And since our initial forays into peer-assisted learning, research and project placements, we've seen this model successfully piloted, and this is probably answering the question that's just come up, I think, across a range of statutory settings in social care and in the NHS. I have prior experience of using it within hospital settings, very traditional occupational therapy hospital settings in Sydney as well. But it is already a model that is widely used in third sector occupational therapy practice-based learning. So it's not a new model. It's not a new model in statutory settings across the allied health professions. It's just a new model for occupational therapy. In conclusion to our section, we hope you'll agree that everybody needs a PAL. Thanks, everyone. I think that's it for me. Just some references there.
Hi, thanks for that, everyone. So we'd just like to put your questions or comments in the Q&A box, and we'll just get through some questions now. So I think we should stop sharing the screen and then we can see everyone's face. Yeah, just bear with me. Okay, so one of the questions, I think there's a question here, I think it's about the first presentation. It's saying, would you call it role? Is it role emerging placement? The service has a registered OT already working within the structure. So I think they just make that just a comment really for the first presentation. And the children's housing. It's Helen here.
Hi there. Hi, you're all right. Yeah, it's a good question actually, because we did wonder where we fitted within that definition of role emerging really. But I think for us it was because it was a new practice area. Derby has never had University of Derby, that is, has never had a placement in housing in any way previously in the last however many years. To us, it was certainly role emerging because it was that new practice area. It was also an evolving and role emerging in terms of how we did the supervision. We've only recently started doing long arm supervisions using staff and other external clinicians as supervisors. So that was slightly different for us as well. So yes, perhaps it doesn't meet all the definitions, but because Derby Homes have they've never had a student ever. So I suppose in the small R, to all the people involved, it was a role emerging placement. In big R, yes, people do take housing placements in other places, but for us, it was a very new experience. And that was part of the beauty of it really, is that we wanted to expand our offer to housing and beyond. We did actually set up some other placements as well as part of this project. So I do take your point, but for us it felt all very new, and then trying new models of supervision. And that was quite interesting because quite often we use long arm supervision when there isn't an OT, so that changed the dynamic slightly as well. That I'd practiced previously in housing. Jane was the OT on site, but didn't have the capacity to pick up supervision. So that was quite a different way of handling that scenario as well. So yes, new small R role emerging, I think is the answer to that.
Okay. And there's another question, I think it's for you as well, Helen. It says, how was the placement tariff distributed? I think
oh my goodness.
And then maybe
now you're asking me a question. I mean, Jenny, I don't know if Jenny's still here or not, because I don't think they had to shoot off, but I'm not quite sure if they've had it yet, if they've had their tariff amount. what happens is we filled in all the audit forms, we filled in all the like the contract, if you like, the level of the placement agreement, I suppose you'd call it. And then there is an automatic system run by a different department where we set Jenny up as the person who can access that. And then they claim, Jenny claims back after the placement, the hours. I don't know how far she's got with that. So Jenny, if you're still here, please jump in. Let's just say there's been some teething troubles with it since we started doing it like this. And that's not criticising anyone or any systems, but there have been some teething troubles and it has been quite difficult to get the tariff to where it's needed to be. Those I understand have been ironed out, and I did actually give Jenny and the team at Derby Homes a heads up about this before even agreeing the placement, that it can take a while for the to follow the student. I'm hoping it's going to arrive with them imminently, if it hasn't done already. And I say, I don't think Jenny can still be here, so that's a good question though. So I wish I would have liked to say yes, it's all fine, but actually probably wouldn't be being honest if I said that.
Or processes as well, isn't it? Learning new processes, it takes
Indeed.
a while.
Absolutely, you're not wrong. Yeah.
And the IT issues as well, working across different systems and things as well. So okay.
Yeah.
There's another question. It says, any tips on how to encourage supervisors to sign up to PAL? It's for a third presentation.
Yeah, that's I think always a challenge. It's helping people sort of get off the starting blocks and take that step. One of the, it's interesting, I think helping people get over their fears around it's twice as much work. I think that's probably the biggest myth that lies around practice-based, peer-assisted learning and practice-based learning. So encouraging and supporting people to remember that it's not just taking two students, it's two students who support each other. So you need to build in that reflection time with students and do that pre-design. Hopefully the sort of handbooky type things that we're trying to do at the moment, the how to make it work, quick guide, we can make those widely available to people as well, because I think something that you can hold and have a look at and think, oh, okay, so I need to build in this time and I need to work it this way, will help people. So just lots of encouragement, I think, and lots of direction to resources. You might find that your allied health professions, your other allied health professions are already doing it. So it's often worth just asking around your different allied health profession services and find that podiatry are doing it and physio are doing it and speech and language are doing it already. So there are practice educators from other professions who can maybe have a bit of a chat with some of your OT practice educators, some of your occupational therapy practice educators to say, oh, it isn't so bad and we've been doing this for a while. I would say probably the other thing that we are trying to get over is, because the one-to-one model is our sort of mainstay or fallback in occupational therapy, we find that when we put out requests for placements as higher education institutions, that's the kind of assumed model. So the assumed model is one-to-one, and if you're going to do anything different, you're kind of going off-piste. So what we're trying to do is, when we send out those requests, offer a range of models that people can tick. So I'll be doing 2-to-1, I'll be doing long arm, I'll be doing project, I'll be doing research, to make those different models feel more normalized, I guess, for want of a better way of describing that. I think it makes people feel more nervous if they have to do something slightly different. And it's easier to default back to the one-to-one, which is the kind of safe, well-known model. But we know it actually doesn't offer some of the enhanced learning that peer-assisted learning does. And actually our evidence tells us it's inferior really to the peer-assisted learning models. So yeah, it's kind of making that shift happen. I think that culture change happen in a whole range of ways. So dealing with people's feelings and emotions and perhaps fears around it, encouraging and supporting, giving people some examples from their own workforce if possible, otherwise using the practice examples, and I'm always really happy to talk to people as well. And then actually making it easy for people to do as well.
Yeah, a lot of people default to that one-to-one model, don't they? Because it's what you know. So there's just another question for Anita. It says, for all the people you've inspired to deliver a PAL placement, what are your top tips for getting started? I think you've answered that a little bit already.
Yeah, I think just taking the leap, but helping people overcome those fears and making it easy to sign up to. Yeah.
And our second presentation on personalised care. So just the students, I think, sorry, is it Paige? Paige, you had said that now you're working in another, obviously a similar like role emerging or non-traditional setting as well, and that placement gave you a lot of opportunities in terms of confidence and leadership as well. So how do you find working in your new role? There's lots of lots of skills that you're translating as well. Do you think in that and now and
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I had to think about was being able to keep my CPD file up to date, and on taking a non-traditional role, it was really important that I could transfer my OT skills and evidence that as well. So it was something I actually discussed at interview, and they're happy to support me with that. Though I won't be necessarily practicing OT, I can use the skills from there to keep my CPD up to date. So yeah, they were really understanding actually. I think once you have that conversation, there's a lot of generic roles now, practitioner roles and things like that, but I think once you have the conversation with the employer, they normally will support you because you are able to transfer these skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Amanda, I think you said, was it the students had 4 educators, was that right? Yeah,
that's right. So there were 2 OTs in their post-COVID assessment service who really looked after the OT process and supported Paige and Tori with that side of things. And then myself and one of my colleagues really acted as mentors around personalised care and enabled both the PCAS team and Tori and Paige to really embed personalised care into their clinical programme. So we offered various tutorials and kind of drop-in sessions for anybody to come and talk to us about personalised care. And as their journey continued and the project continued, just to really kind of build it into their clinical process. Yeah, so poor Paige and Tori had 4 different people to go to for advice and information and support. But I think in the first presentation, they were talking about communication being the key, and that was definitely something that we worked on, had WhatsApp groups and different communication channels that we used to make sure the 4 of us could support Paige and Tori in the best way possible.
Yeah, and also you obviously gain skills from everybody as well, don't you? Everyone brings their own unique perspective to the role as well. So. Yeah. So we're at time now. Actually, time went really fast. Actually, at 10 a.m. now. So I just bring everything to a close. So eventually, these recordings will be on the RCOT website, and also there should be some links in the chat as well to the practice-based learning. Oops, one second. If I just share the slides again. Second. Okay. Okay, so there is a 5-minute reflection tool that should be coming up in the chat. You can just use that to reflect as well on how you think today, what you learned from today, and what you might take forward. So there's a document to download as well. So the link should be in the chat for you now. And also, if you'd like to scan the QR code or click on the office forms would be in the chat, and just give us your feedback on how you think the session went and how we can develop these sessions further. Okay, so and these are the links for supporting practice-based learning, and also the links to the practice-based learning principles as well, which will be in the chat for you now. Okay, so thank you for your time and your thoughts. So if you'd like to tweet anything, it's #RCOTPBL, and also this is the website, and they have all the information there on practice-based learning for you. And the references. So yes, as I said previously, the slides and the recordings eventually will be on the RCOT website for you to view at your leisure. All right, well, thank you very much for your time.